I have the privilege to present a Lillian Smith Book Award to Ariela J. Gross, who is the John B. and Alice R. Sharp Professor of Law and History at the University of Southern California. Although each year we have many excellent choices, Dr. Gross was a standout from the beginning. She has had the courage to undertake a discussion of this vexed and troubled subject. She has written, "Litigating the identity of the smaller number of people who were not clearly marked white or Negro mattered tremendously in the history of race and racism for two reasons. First, because the margins were bigger than we have thought. Since the earliest days of the Republic, there have been a significant number of people whose identity was not fixed by appearance or even by a confluence of appearance, status, ancestry, and associations, as we have seen in the works of Dr. Henry Louis Gates and others. Second, because the margins of the category create the core. People revealed what race meant to them only when they needed to adjudicate its boundaries. And in drawing those boundaries, they were creating race. Already, we are into a consideration of a subtle and complex topic. And what is important is that she states, today race and racism are still with us. If it were true that racism in the past was based only on a now discredited biological understanding of race, it would have been comparatively easy to eradicate racism with colorblind policies in the late 20th century. Yet, despite the hard-won victories of civil rights struggles in the 20th century, to which Bob Zellner was an all too involved witness, racism has survived, and it has done so in part because its bases are shifting and mobile, which sounds so like how viruses behave, shifting to meet new challenges to their existence. For so long as many still believe that differing life chances do and should correlate with one's performance of identity, one's ability to achieve citizenship through blood, or one's practices of culture, racism will persist. And this is why Dr. Gross's thoughtful discussion is so important, and why we meet today to give her the Lillian Smith Award.
Well, thank you so much. Dr. Johnson and Dr. Twining, it's really a pleasure to be here at this wonderful book festival and to receive this honor from the Southern Regional Council and the University of Georgia and the Georgia Center for the Book. But I'm especially honored to receive an award named for Lillian Smith, whose writing was such a beacon for change in the South long before the Supreme Court or Congress or national institutions acted to put an end to Jim Crow. And I'm also especially honored to receive an award for doing a small part to advance understanding of the South, because although I've been studying the South for about 20 years now, I'm not a Southerner, and this book isn't strictly speaking a Southern history, so I'm thrilled to have it recognized as having something to say about the struggle for racial justice, not only in the South, but in the nation. In fact, I think the biggest challenge for me in writing it was trying to talk about both the South and the rest of the country in the way that made sense. So I want to say a few things about the book, but before I do that, I just want to acknowledge a couple of people who are here today. And first, my daughter, Sophia. She's here representing her dad and her big sister. You couldn't be here. And sitting next to her, my friend Leslie Harris. As I thought about this book, she helped shape this book and almost everything I've written in some way. And in particular, when I first sketched out sort of my plan, before I'd written, my proposal, I had it structured so the part one was about the South and part two was sort of everything else. And Leslie pointed out to me that structure would make it appear as though race and racism were a Southern problem that then infected the rest of the country. And that's not true. Race is, as Gunnar Myrdal said, about the same time Strange Fruit was written, race is the American dilemma. And I wanted to write a book that could try to capture the different permutations of that dilemma of race across the country and across time. And that was the challenge for me, and Leslie really helped me with that. This book was in the making for about more than 10 years, and it took me to archives and courthouses all over the country, but it actually started in Georgia with a case I found in the Georgia Department of Archives and History. So I thought I would just briefly tell you the story of that case so you have an idea of the kind of trials I'm talking about, because this book tells the history of race and racism in this country through the lens of trials of racial identity, cases where courts are trying to figure out whether someone is black or white or Indian, later on whether they were white for the purposes of immigration, naturalization, so a range of cases. But the first trial of racial identity I ever read, I found in the Georgia archives while I was looking for something else, and the way history scholarship often happens. It was called Bryan versus Walton, and it was a case that went up and down the Georgia court system 3 times in the 1840s and 1850s. And the second time it reached Georgia's highest court, the opinion gained some notoriety because the judge in that case articulated an argument that would be borrowed a few years later by Justice Taneys of the Supreme Court in the infamous decision of Dred Scott. It was an argument that explained that even a free man of color could never be a citizen and had no rights a white man was bound to respect. And Justice Taneys actually borrowed it from this Georgia Supreme Court case. But in the 3 trials, so I knew the case because of its high court opinion, but the trials were nothing like the opinion in the high court. The trials instead were all about the question of whether a man of color of whether a particular man, James Nunez and his father, were white, and therefore whether they could convey slaves. And so the question was actually not about why a man of color could be or couldn't be a citizen, then with proving a man had acted like a citizen in order to prove he was white. So the testimony in the case, trying to decide is he white or a man of color, the testimony was not only about the parentage of this man, his father, their ancestry, but it was about who they associated with, how well they danced, which was apparently evidence of whiteness, and whether or not they voted, sat on juries, or mustered in the militia. And so I was really struck by what at first appeared to me as a circularity. To gain full rights of citizenship, they had to be proven white. But to prove them white, one had to demonstrate that they had acted like citizens. And I found this apparent circularity again and again in these trials, which seems circular until one understands the belief that blood will tell. The deep equation that people were making in these cases between what 20th century anthropologists would later divide into race and culture, the deep equation they made between whiteness and citizenship. A free citizen was a white man was a free citizen. As one South Carolina judge explained, a slave cannot be a white man. Therefore, someone who had behaved as a citizen must be white, and that was simply racial common sense. So the case should have been decided by legal rules or statutes about quote-unquote Negro identity that were formulated in terms of ancestry. And often I found before I started to write, historians of the law and legal scholars write about the history of race in terms of the rise of the one-drop rule. They look at those statutes and they look at the fractions of ancestry and they say that's the important story here is if you look at what's on the books, it becomes, it's the rise of the one-drop rule. And it's often used to contrast the United States to other systems of slavery in the Americas that had more racial categories, more intermediate, more racial mixture, more intermediate categories. But as Dr. Twining quoted, in fact, there was more mixing in the U.S., more people of ambiguous racial status than we've acknowledged, and ancestry rules actually couldn't decide actual cases. And so the book was my effort to write the history of the making of race, not through statutes or high court opinions, but through the way ordinary people on the ground in local courthouses actually understood and changed the meaning of race. And what I found was persistent, and it continues to plague us today, unfortunately, is that equation of whiteness and citizenship. And that, I think, is our challenge today, is to break that equation. So I thank all of you very much, and I'm honored to be associated with people who are doing such wonderful work to break that equation, and also to share the stage with Bob Zellner, one of my heroes of the civil rights movement. So thank you all very much.